We'll talk about delivering unfavorable or bad news message and what is bad news or what is an unfavorable message. And so we need to know first why we have to deliver bad news in our everyday life. There are a lot of situations that we deliver bad news, and in so the purpose of delivering a bad news is that we would like to give a brief, clear and respectful message. So the message should be stated once, and we don't want the bad news to be repeated. Also, we try to show fairness and logic of the decision to accept for the reader the bad for the reader to prepare them to accept the bad news. And we carefully try to remove negative language used while we deliver bad news. Most importantly, we want to continue our good relationship with the audience. And further, we try to avoid any confusion or ambiguity when we deliver a bad news. Now, a subject line for a bad news can be a positive one, can be a neutral one, or can be a negative one. It all depends on the situation. For example, upgrading employee benefit package, it's a positive subject line because it gives the benefits to the employee. At the same time, it also involves the cost. And if we talk about the neutral subject lines, that water shut off or subscription rate increase, these are the factual information that every individual is involved with this, and there is no one personally benefited or personally affected. So these are neutral subject line. And negative subject line, sometimes we have to deliver, because if negative subject line is not delivered, is not written, then there might be an ambiguity or confusion in the reader's mind. For example, error in quarter three sales data. So quarter three sales data contains errors. If this is not mentioned in the subject line, that would be a problem. Now, in what situations we deliver bad news? So there are three different situations. One is we refuse invitations, suggestions, and we refuse proposals, and so on. We also see the bad news in the form of the announcement. For example, price increase, policy changes, delivery delays, and also we have some appraisal assessments that can come with negative information or negative results. And when we talk about the structure of a bad news, we always use indirect plan, means that as we don't know the reader well, and we know that bad news is not anticipated by the reader positively. Also, we anticipate a strong negative reaction from the reader. So we also use a buffer to calm down the reader's mindset towards the bad news. And a buffer is 2 to 3 sentence opening that guides the reader towards explanation, followed in the middle paragraphs. And an effective buffer can never mislead the reader into thinking that positive news will follow. So as a result, we never think that there's something positive, and we don't want to give any message that something positive is coming on or following on from the buffer. And writing plan for the indirect approach to deliver a bad news is that we used usually an opening, middle, we segmented it into two different segments, and a closing. So opening, we open with a buffer with the bad news and guide the reader to follow the explanation. And we try to get the readers ready for the bad news. And we never give any sense to the reader that good news is coming from the buffer. In the middle, two different parts. First part is explanation about why the bad news is delivered or has to be delivered. And second is that we state the bad news in one sentence, possibly with an alternative, giving an alternative to the audience. And we want to close with a goodwill statement showing why We have we have always thinking, or we always want to keep a good relationship with the audience. And how we can reveal the bad news? One is that we can put the bad news in a dependent clause. For example, we can suggest a compromise and alternative, although your printer could be repaired. So here, the bad news has been introduced with the dependent clause, and then an alternative has been offered. We use a passive voice here, so we could say that your printer could not be repaired, but that can leave negative impact in the reader's mind. So that's why we use passive voice and use long sentences. Also use positive language. We try to avoid the word like refuse, regret, and deny, unfortunately, or cannot. We try to avoid those language because this can leave negative or other impact on the audience. Here, applications will be accepted until March 15 is a positive sentence because both of the sentences carry the same meaning, but one is negative, another one is positive. Another important part of delivering or revealing the bad news is that we try to avoid spotlighting the bad news. We only keep it along with the alternatives in the middle paragraph, and we just state it once. We don't repeat the bad news. And when we use a Google closing, we don't repeat the bad news. So bad news should be stated only once, and we don't repeat it. Also, we offer good wishes. For example, thank you for the interest you have shown in our product. We wish every success in your future career. We never invite further correspondence in goodwill message as we do it with the direct approach or with other positive correspondence. And we never apologize for having to say no in the bad news delivery or in delivering the bad news. So this is all about bad news or revealing bad news or unfavorable message and how we can write it. So these strategies will help us to understand how we can deliver and how we can prepare the audience to accept the bad news and to deliver the bad news. I hope that this will be helpful for you to understand how we can write a bad news message. Thank you for listening to this conversation.